Good night, investigators. Welcome. The third day of December, the inhabitants of Haiger woke up to tragic news. A family had been murdered, 8 persons, including the housekeepers. The only survivor was the patriarch of the family. The news threw the town into a panic, with people claiming to have seen as many as 25 bandits near the villa before the events. At first, whispers of bandit raids spread like wildfire. Locals report seeing shadowy figures lurking near the villa. Panic grips the town. But the truth, my friends, is far more sinister. The killer wasn't some outsider. He was one of their own. Fritz Angerstein was born on January 3, 1891, in Dillenburg. The 7th of 10 children, he was the son of the town's mayor. His infancy was difficult, as he suffered from tuberculosis, a bacterial infection that attacks the lungs and causes constant coughing of blood and chest pain. He also underwent a surgical removal of a rib. Despite these challenges, he began working as a surveyor, determining distances between 3-dimensional points and helping to establish boundaries of ownership and locations of interest. In 1911, Angerstein married Kata Barth, a devout Methodist who found solace in the sermons of John Wesley. Their early years were happy, but by 1920, Kata's health began to decline due to a mysterious intestinal illness. Despite their longing for children, the couple endured 6 miscarriages, driving them to the brink of despair and even contemplating suicide. The weight of their grief and his mother-in-law's accusations of infertility fueled his resentment, and he began to mistreat Kata. In 1917, he became the manager of a limestone mine in Haiger, a position that gave him authority over the mine and its workers. This didn't improve his relationship with his mother-in-law, as it remained strained. Then one day, Kata disappeared. Convinced that she was the reason his wife had run away, he attacked the older woman with a dog whip, threatening to kill both her and himself if Kata didn't return home. His wife eventually returned, but this violent episode further demonstrated the decline of his already ill mind. A suicide attempt occurred in 1921. He and his wife agreed to drown themselves. A desperate act of a childless couple, bound by illness and despair, they sought peace in the cold embrace of the lake. But something happened. The sound of someone singing nearby broke through their trance. They abandoned their attempt and returned to shore. Later that year, Angerstein relocated to Haiger with his wife, his mother-in-law, and his sister-in-law. His company provided him with a spacious villa for their accommodation. Around this time, however, Angerstein found himself in financial difficulty and resorted to embezzling from his employer. He eventually stole 14,892 Reichsmarks, equivalent to approximately 180 USD at that time, a significant sum in 1921, though its true value was constantly shifting in the face of growing inflation. But his deception was short-lived. The fraud came to light during a meeting with a procurator about wage accounting. Confronted with the discrepancies in the accounts, Angerstein's already precarious situation worsened, and he began exhibiting signs of paranoia. The tragedy became imminent. On the night of November 30th, leading into December 1st, 1924, Angerstein tampered with the telephone wire and water pipes of the house. Between midnight and 1 a.m. on December 1st, he and his wife awoke, both experiencing severe heart pain. Though he wanted to call for a doctor, his wife dissuaded him. Instead, he fetched his mother-in-law. Later, after Kata returned to bed, Angerstein sat beside her as she read him a letter. When she finished, he changed the pillowcase, which had been stained by her vomiting. He then overheard a conversation between his wife and mother-in-law about another letter, this one written by his brother-in-law. The letter stated that he had syphilis and that the disease could spread to other family members, which agitated Angerstein. He proceeded to talk with his wife about the letter and recalled her once telling him that she wanted to die the same hour he died. On his trial, he declared, "I went into the study and got the revolver from the desk. With it, I went into the bedroom to my wife, who was lying in bed. I held it to her forehead and pulled the trigger, but it didn't fire. I knew it was loaded. I checked it. My wife began to wrestle with me, snatched the revolver away, and hid it under the bed covers. Throughout all this, my wife said nothing, but fell back into bed, exhausted. After this, Angerstein seized his hunting dagger from the study and fatally stabbed his wife 18 times. Grabbing the handgun from the bed covers, he tried to shoot himself, but it failed again. He went downstairs to his study to grab his other guns, but both revolvers misfired. He then ran to the cellar to find another means of ending his own life. A hand axe caught his eye. He seized it to finish himself, but his mother-in-law's screams drew him back upstairs. She confronted him in the hallway before retreating to the bedroom. Enraged over what he perceived as her mistreatment of his ailing wife, he grabbed his axe with both hands and struck her head, killing her instantly. Angerstein noticed the maidservant, Minna Stoll, standing in the hallway. Seeing the bodies and the bloody axe in his hand, she fled up the stairs toward the attic. Angerstein caught her just before she reached the attic door, seizing her and striking her down. Later, he claimed he killed her because she burned meals, was unclean, and he and his wife were generally dissatisfied with her. Her body was later found burned on the first floor. Returning to the bedroom, Angerstein attacked his still-alive mother-in-law and the body of his wife once more. He then went back to the kitchen, washed the axe in his hands, sat down, and slept. When his 18-year-old sister-in-law, Ella Barth, returned during the night from a train journey, she went upstairs and into the bathroom. Angerstein followed her and killed her with the axe, and then covered her body because he couldn't bear to look at her. Around 7 o'clock on Monday, December 1st, a bookkeeper named Dittert and a clerk named Kiel arrived at the villa for work. Angerstein called them one by one into his study, locked the door, and killed them with the axe. During the day, he also killed the gardener's son, Geist, and another laborer, Dar, with a hatchet, fearing they might have seen the bodies. His German shepherd was later found in the locked cellar with its head smashed in. When a machinist named Ebert arrived, Angerstein handed him a letter for his brother before sending him away. When asked about his disheveled appearance, he claimed he was sick. Afterward, he poured gasoline, possibly brought with a truck later, found a few kilometers outside of town, in his study on the ground floor and the rooms on the first floor. He then went shopping in the city, buying 2 chocolate bars, which he claimed were for his dear wife, and a flashlight. He also visited a bookshop. One might expect this carnage to culminate in the suicide he repeatedly attempted. Instead, he inflicted non-lethal stab wounds on himself, tried to set his house on fire, and then called the police with a fabricated story about a deadly home invasion by bandits. Angerstein told his helpers and the police that he was assaulted in his villa after returning from town. Firefighters quickly extinguished the flames. He was taken to the hospital in Haiger, where he underwent surgery. Law enforcement agencies from Siegen and Wetzlar dispatched officers for protection, while local militias formed to combat the perceived threat of a dangerous and active criminal gang. The investigators were suspicious of his story. Rigor mortis had already set in the corpses, contradicting his claims about when the killings had occurred. Additionally, his fingerprints were found on the weapons and on the dead bodies, and there were no signs of a robbery. During interrogation by the prosecutor, he denied having committed the killings himself, but made contradictory statements. Because of this, Angerstein was arrested, though he remained in the hospital. After the autopsy, he was accused of the murders and finally confessed to his brother in the presence of a police officer. After the confession, Dana, a professor at the University of Cologne, photographed the retinas of 2 of the victims. He claimed the images showed Angerstein's face and the axe used to kill the gardener. These retinal photographs were included among other evidence presented at the trial, where the defendant was swiftly convicted. Out of fear that the public might turn against him, Angerstein was moved to Limburg 2 weeks before the trial began in July 1925. The trial became a media spectacle, attracting widespread publicity and coverage. It was considered one of the most sensational mass murder trials of the Weimar Republic. The accused faced 13 charges, including 8 counts of murder, 2 counts of embezzlement, and 1 count each of forging documents, arson, and perjury. He admitted to bribery and later to embezzlement, but claimed that his employer, Van der Zijpen, owed him money. Over 150 witnesses and 27 experts were called to testify. On July 13th, after a 6-day trial, the court sentenced Angerstein to death 8 times, once for each of the murders. He was also deprived of his civil rights. The other charges against him were dismissed. He accepted the verdict, stating that he did not want mercy and that his crimes could only be atoned for with his blood. On November 17, 1925, at 8 a.m., Angerstein was executed by decapitation in the courtyard of the central prison, Fray Diaz. I appreciate you joining me today. If you're interested in more videos about criminals cases, hit that subscribe button. Until next time.